Hi, it's Jill Sprott here with this week's Scrap Your Stash feature. Admit it, you, like me, have skeletons in your closet, and you, like me, are a scrapbooker, so that closet is a desk drawer, and those skeletons are the remains of alphabet sets of days past. Let's put them to use this week. In this video, I'll share with you how I brought back to life a few lucky alphabets on a back-to-school layout by incorporating them in the journaling. Without any actual back-to-school photos yet, I opted to use just a simple portrait of my daughter taken over the summer for a layout journaling about the year ahead. And then I pulled out a bunch of different alphas from my stash of different types and sizes, including like flat sticker-based alphas, thickers, stamps, and acrylic letters. All of them are matched to work with the colors in the photo. So if you notice the photo, there's kind of this aqua color there on her shirt, maybe with a green tinge. There's red-orange plaid design, and then there's the green in the background with this kind of yellow-orange hue. And so all of the letters were pulled to work with that. I then embarked on my usual paper hunting expedition that marks the beginning of the layout process for me, pulling together different patterns that work with the colors in the photo so that later, even though I may not be using every single pattern on the layout, they're at the ready, perfectly coordinated, ready to be used. Although I was keeping my options open for different patterns, I was certain that I wanted to use a craft cardstock background and some of these watercolor patterns from Glitz Design. With various supplies and lots of options close at hand, I then set about figuring out the design of the page. Keeping in mind the rule of thirds, I placed my photo where the first vertical and last horizontal invisible lines intersect. As I planned the design, I also had to keep in mind that I wanted to incorporate a lot of journaling on the page, and so the plan was to split the page into 50-50, or two parts. The first part would be for the photo block and the pattern papers, any embellishments that I might want to collect, and then the other half would be for the journaling, which I would work the alphabets into along the way. Although the journaling half wouldn't allow me to work in many layers, the photo block half of the page would definitely allow me to play with the layers that I love. And so I used the Glitz Design watercolor background papers, and I started with a rectangle of yellow and decided to build on that. I then turned my attention toward building up the layers of the photo mat. The base of it is a piece of white corrugated cardstock, just a scrap of paper that I had nearby. I like the texture and dimension that it brings to a page. And then I just put layers of paper over and under it. A lot of them, again, just chosen for the colors in the photo, but also how they look placed next to each other. The glitz papers that I'm using here are from two new collections from the company called Finley and Wild and Free. I just love the colors in these papers, like this one from Finley called Drip, appropriately named because it looks like paint dripping. It's awesome. I wasn't done with the pattern papers yet, though. I had pre-sorted a bunch for a reason, and so I put them to use. I pulled out this sheet from Basic Gray, which I love because it complements the colors in my daughter's shirt. I also used this Kate & Company Oxford Lane pattern paper. It's polka dots on one side and stripes on the other. Rather than go all Rambo with the adhesive, I just used a little piece of double-sided tape between a few of the layers, just because the plan changes along the way often when I scrap. This way I could just pick up papers and just remove them or reassign them to different areas without any issues. These Carta Bella journaling cards also stood out to me when I was collecting supplies for the layout. For some reason, the colors just merge beautifully with the photo. There's a little bit of that greenish aqua color and these orange blossoms, which complement the colors in the photo beautifully, but also emphasize the theme of the page, which is all about growth and change in the face of a new school year. With a few minor tweaks, the photo block was actually ready to go. On the opposite side, I plan to incorporate the journaling. Initially, I planned to just write it directly on the page, but my fear got the better of me, so I decided to journal on a piece of pattern paper and then add that to the page. That way, if I messed up, I could always restart without an issue. I opted to use a grid pattern background from a B-side of an Amy Tangerine paper, And then the pens that I chose, I was kind of deliberating whether I should use a black pen or a gold pen, but I decided that the gold would actually look pretty cool to have that kind of metallic effect stand out from the page. So, with my gold pen in one hand and my first alphabet in the other, I started my journaling. The approach is actually really quite simple. The idea is to embed the alphabet A through Z into the journaling in the course of writing. I know that may not seem simple, but it really is. It just all has to do with taking a pause just for a moment to figure out when the next letter will be coming up. Sometimes it really does involve crafting your writing to make sure that that letter appears when you need it to appear, but you don't really have to force the writing along the way. For instance, the letter D is up next here. The journaling so far has been about my daughter's junior year, and as she looks ahead, she's looking at the most demanding course load she's ever had in her life. The problem here is how can I fit in D in a series of courses that have no D in them? Luckily, as I was writing, I realized that there's going to be the word and here. And so I was able to fit in a tiny little letter D toward the right side of the page. I'm also distributing the colors if you notice. So there's some blue there, some gray, some orange and red. I'm also using here, as you can see, a white foam letter, which seems unextraordinary on its own, but you can use an ink dauber, to change the color of the letter. At this point in the page, you can't really notice it yet, but I started to shift the journaling, not the approach that I was taking to the letters, but the pronoun that I was using. Initially, I had started to use third person. I talked about my daughter as a she. It started with, she's a junior in high school now. But along the way, as I started to really think about the impact of this year on my daughter, I shifted the pronoun and started using you. So I know it's kind of a no-no in grammar, but I can forgive myself for that mistake. Just maybe you can learn from it. As you're writing, maybe decide from the start whether you want to use she or he or you. I think you is actually a really good idea, though, when you're dealing with working through kind of intensely personal thoughts. This journaling ended up serving almost as a letter to my daughter. And so if I could go back and just do it again, sure, I would probably change that she to you from the very start. But I think the shift is not very noticeable, and I'm sure she'll forgive me for the error. The point of the journaling, after all, is not to win a Pulitzer Prize, but to get the message across to my dear daughter. To that end, the journaling at this point shifts from being about my daughter's junior year, the classes that she's taking, anticipating all the changes ahead, to actually just sharing with her my philosophy about what true learning is, my hopes for the year, and my hopes for her learning. And so it goes from being kind of from the surface to something a bit deeper. At this point, you can see this embedded alphabet starting to emerge in the journaling. A few things to notice would be how I've tried my best to scatter the letters, not just in terms of positioning, but in terms of the color use as well. So you can see, for instance, how the A and the K are both aqua, but they're not directly next to each other, so there's not this sort of huge concentrated color on the page. There's also the D and the M, which have a similar color, and they're also separated. As I journal, it's not just that I'm jumping on, say, the first occurrence of a word, like, oh, this is an M, I'm going to use it right away. I also try to make sure that I'm distributing the letters, from right to center to left, to make sure that they're all kind of evenly dispersed as much as possible. In some cases, it can't be avoided. One fun thing to keep in mind is that you can actually get a little creative with the letters. Not all letters really need to be letters. For instance, the O on this page that I just added is a metal badge from Two Peas in a Bucket, one of the new exclusives. The other thing to keep in mind is that when using larger alphas, like the H above or the P that I just added, or as you'll see, the Q that I'm about to add, is that you just pretty much play through with the journaling. It seems like it's sucking up space, but it really doesn't. You just write around it, keep progressing. This Q, which is an acrylic alphabet from crepe paper, I didn't want to just adhere it directly to the paper and write around it because there is a kind of space that surrounds the cue. And so I just kept laying it down and picking it up to kind of eyeball where the area is that I could write underneath it. And only until I had filled the entire space around it did I actually adhere it to the page. After Q, it was on to S, and so I reached once again for a white foam letter, and I modified it just as I did with the E using an ink dauber. I like the idea of the two-tone letters. I did it with both of the letters, where there's one color at the top and another at the bottom, and the space where it blends in the middle looks kind of neat. Now that the space around the Q was covered, it was time to adhere the letter. I used just some craft glue and smeared it on the back. At this point in the journaling, with just a few alphabets left to use and just a little space left, I had to be really mindful of the words that I was choosing and the space that I was using so that I could fit everything there. Luckily, my daughter's name begins with Z, so I knew I had Z covered at the very end. I had something to work toward. Not everybody has a Z daughter or Z son, and so I guess it's just a matter of being creative with how you fit that Z in at the very end. Just know that there are Z words out there for you. You could always end with, I love pizza. Everybody loves pizza, right? Even if you're doing a layout about your grandmother, you could add that, and I'm sure she'd agree. Okay, maybe not pizza. How about the word amazing? Amazing is a good word to work into your journaling at the very end, right? You got it. All right, so let's check our letter progress. Here I just added a metal badge from two peas in a bucket. The X is actually two crossed arrows serving as a letter, not just a cute little badge. And then I added my Y and my Z, and with Z being the very last of the letters, and I didn't even have to use the word amazing or pizza, the journaling was done. As I reassembled the page, it still felt to me as if the layout wasn't quite complete. I decided to embellish the photo block area a bit more, starting with some chipboard pieces from Farmhouse Paper Company. These I love because they look kind of like office supplies or school supplies, but they have a vintage feel, so they add some old school to a back to school layout. The chipboard set pieces were actually used kind of strategically here. In one sense, they give height to the page, but in another, in the case of this pencil, it's kind of pointing toward the journaling, calling attention toward it, so that the eye travels to the photo and then toward the journaling. For a label junkie like me, no page of mine is complete without the addition of a label, like this one from Bella Boulevard. I stamped the date on it using some ocean ink from Hero Arts. I added a reddish-orangish notes tab from my mind's eye to the photo block area just to mirror some of the red and orange that you see in the journaling. The fact that I used double stick tape came in handy, as you can see here, as I decided to add some stitching to that photo block. Because I'm building up in layers and have that chipboard piece, I couldn't just sew directly on it. I was afraid that I might hurt the needle, break the needle, and so I just took off the entire photo block and stitched around the paper area. I did the same with the journaling as well, stitching over just a few letters here and there. One of the reasons why I added the stitching to the photo block at this point and not at the very end of the process was because I wanted to incorporate a metal badge that said right here, right now. It's also serving as maybe a subtle little title. I didn't want a full title block on the layout just because the letters in the journaling are so visible, so obvious. A huge title actually might upstage the whole layout. One of the finishing touches was to add another piece of chipboard, building up the layers just a bit more and adding pop dots underneath to kind of stabilize or balance that layering. And then that yellow pattern paper, as much as I love it, was just maybe a little too yellow, so I added some cloud pattern paper from my mind's eye B-side, and there it is, the finished layout. I love that it incorporates so many different letters in a unified way, and that it allows for so much journaling. That's actually really quite meaningful, even though the page appears on the surface to be almost whimsical. Now it's your turn. Put those letter stickers to good use and see if you can incorporate an embedded alphabet on one of your pages. Even if you take a different approach to using letters from A to Z, that's fine. I would love to see what you come up with, so please share your layouts in the Two Peas in a Bucket gallery. Thanks for joining me for this week's Scrap Your Stash.